Okay, hi everyone, thanks for coming along to the extended version of the review of the Tamron 28-75mm lens. So if you haven't seen the quick review, I'll put the link down below. If you want to just not bother, you want to know all the details about this that I've ever experienced with it, then continue watching. Okay, so the 28-75mm lens is cheap, it's light, it's small in comparison to some of its bigger brothers. For example, the Nikon 24-70mm lens is about 1.2 kilograms in weight. It's a very heavy lens. And the big brother version of this, the 24-70 VC, vibration control from Tamron, is a chunky lens as well. So if we look at the differences there, is pretty massive. What I'll do is I'll take them off. So that is the difference that we're looking at going on here. So in terms of kind of length, yeah, they're pretty much the same, but in terms of width, this one is massive. And also if you look at the actual ends of it, the Tamron VC is a huge lens compared to the non-VC version. So maybe you're thinking, I'd just rather get the VC. This one seems to be so much bigger. It's got vibration control. Why would I even bother getting the 28-75mm lens? 28 is not even that wide. Well, that's fine. However, what I would say is that having the extra 5mm at the end of this is not that big a difference. You're not ever really going to notice that. Having the 28, however, you will kind of think that sucks compared to the 24. For my type of photography, I like wide open stuff, and this at 28, I'm thinking, oh, it's too restrictive. I need to always step back. However, for £350 brand new, yeah, I'm happy to take that out. What I would say is this lens is most likely to be used for something like nightclubs, for not so much in the studio. If you've got the price or the ability to use a studio, you're probably going to use more expensive lenses. However, this, because it's so light, because it's relatively small, it doesn't take up so much space in your camera bag, and because it's got cheaper size filters, 67mm filter thread compared to that one which is 82mm, then you're probably just more likely to use this one in cases when you're just not needing the most optimum image quality possible. What I would say is that the center focus of this, fantastic. No, never had any problems, all the way down to f2.8. The center, nice and sharp. With this lens, however, there are, Tamron sometimes doesn't have quite the manufacturing precision that's required for it to work perfectly on all cameras. Fortunately, the cameras which I use, the Nikon D300 and the Canon 5D and the Nikon D700, you've got options of micro adjustments where if you notice a lens is constantly front focusing or back focusing, you've got ability to do adjustments within the camera which will change how this focuses. And for this one, I had to change it by a +5 so that it would focus correctly on objects far away. But that was only when it was at 75mm. So just something to be aware of. If you buy it, you think, oh, it's not focusing properly, it may just be the case that your camera has a certain variance of what it considers to be in focus, and the lens may have a different variance of what's in focus, and if they're both out, it may always look blurry, but you can change that usually if you've got a higher end camera. So what this does is it works on the APC size sensor cameras, the Nikon D300, D7000, all those little ones, and also it works on the full frame cameras as well, like the Canon 5D Mark II and all that, and the Nikon D700, D800, D600. And so that's pretty awesome. You can get a lens in the standard zoom area, which is the 24-70, with a constant f2.8, which will also take you all the way up to your full frame cameras for under 300 quid. And because it's under 300 quid, you're not worried about it. So that's why I say you probably got to get this. It's more likely to be used for nightclub photographers. Get a flash on top, bounce off the ceiling. You're going to get great portraits of like groups of 3-4 people with this standing at this roughly distance. However, what we'll do a quick look just now at the actual sharpness effects on this. So I'll stick this on a camera, we'll start playing around. Okay, so here I've got the lens on the full frame Nikon D700. So first thing we're going to look at is its speed of focus. If I keep the lens cap on, it's going to have to hunt for focus, and it's going to have to go all the way to the furthest focusing to the closest focusing. And we'll see how fast that goes with this camera. So 3, 2, 1. Seems pretty darn quick. It is a little bit noisy. You're going to scare away some birds if you're trying to do that. But it's going pretty darn quick. If we take off, I'll put it so that it's a single point and it makes a noise. Cool. Now, as I say, this lens is most likely to be used handheld, probably in nightclubs and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to do an example of what it's like in terms of its sharpness indoors. So I've got my beautiful model here, Mr. Hippo, looking rather dasher, I must say, and I'm just going to go shoot his face. So at f2.8, the other thing is that this saying it's a macro lens is like 1 to 3.8 terms in terms of macro. So not totally macro, but it does mean you get to only 33 centimeters away from your actual subject. So if I put Mr. Hippo in the corner here, I go over here, and I'm going to focus on his eye. That's a 640th of a second photo that's giving me there at f2.8, and I can get even closer. So that's me at my closest. Now f2.8 giving me a 650th of a second image. And now if I stay at that closest point, so there, but I also zoom in, boom. I came down to 400th of a second, obviously less brightness going on in the background, but I'm getting a 75mm lens focusing at only 33 centimeters away from subject, which is, I think it's 33 centimeters from the actual focal plane of the camera. So you get amazingly shallow depth of field images there. Absolutely. Oh, I really do respect this lens for that ability. However, that's the central focus. This time we'll look at the edge focus. So what I'll do is, so there we've got it, so his eye's in the top right focusing point. And if I change the focusing point over to the top left, focus it on his left eye at 500th of a second. And we'll look at that. Now if I just do a very boring photo where I take a photo, I'll just focus right in front of me at f2.8, we're getting a 5,000th of a second. If I take that, and then if I change the aperture to f5, we'll have a look at the vignetting difference on the full frame camera like this. Okay, so here we are looking at the raw photos that have come straight out of camera. I'm not doing anything here in terms of exposure, contrast, highlights, clarity or anything. It's just how they came straight out of the camera. The only thing is, I did have it at a very high ISO at 4500. However, with the Nikon D700, that's nothing. That's absolutely easy. So here, if we're looking at the photos, again, I'm looking at this on a 27-inch Mac, and it's been compressed down to a 1080p video. So depending on how you see it, you might not quite see all the details that we're getting in here. So this first one here, 28mm at f2.8, this was at the closest I could get, so this is at its macro, and we're getting a 640th of a second. So in terms of the image quality that we're getting, if we zoom right in, let it clear up, you can see the individual fibres in Mr. Hippo's face going on there. And as you can see that there's a very shallow depth of field, the fact that the front of his nose is blurry, eyes nice and sharp, and then his back arm is already blurred. So the depth of field is minute, absolutely tiny. But in terms of like central sharpness, I'm happy with that. It's possibly a fraction more focused over here than it is on his eye, but we're looking at the difference of what is barely 2 millimeters worth of depth difference there. So you've got to be super accurate. And again, this was handheld. What you will notice is around the corners, strong vignetting. That is a dark spot up here. This again, remember, it is on a full frame camera, so you will notice it far more. If you're doing on an APS-C size sensor camera, you'd probably be more around about this region here rather than this region there. So again, you effectively would have better image performance on a crop sensor camera compared to the full frame camera in terms of your details and exposure you get around the edges. So that was at 28mm, the widest angle. Then going in pretty much in exactly the same position to 75mm, and again you can see we're really close up to Mr. Hippo's face, and in terms of zoom, yeah, it's like it's almost less than like from the front of his ear there. That's fuzzy, that's out of focus. Meanwhile, just a millimetre behind, there's some bits which are in focus. However, what I would say is that the bits which are in focus in the centre area, I am more than happy with that. That is pretty darn good. Again, when it's zoomed into 75mm, the vignetting is a lot less. So up in the corners here, that's still looking bright. There is still vignetting. That I'm not saying that's not there, and you can definitely see it in the corners over here. However, that was the darker side. But it's much less vignetting at 75mm on the full frame camera there. Okay, and then I moved him over to the sides to get shots of how good it is when we've moved him into the edges here. So if we check out the focus here, it's acceptable. Is as far I would go there. It's not nearly as sharp as what the center is, and you still do get the idea of the depth of field. Like the front of his nose here is definitely like bokeh blurry. Meanwhile, his eyes are just not quite. You can just tell that's just not so great an image. However, that was still 650th of a second at f2.8. So again, remember at f2.8, that is the most difficult aperture to get the best quality. Normally, you stop down to like an f4 or an f5.6 kind of region. And when I moved him over to the other side, let's see here, trying to focus on his eyes. And definitely it seems to focus just a millimetre behind his eyes, or behind him. And you can see the side of his face there, but his eyes are pretty blurry. So again, definitely this lens not the best at the edges, certainly in terms of focusing capability. Again, you could blame that on my handheld focusing. So again, if you're doing it with a tripod, that's fine. However, I do expect this lens to be far more handheld than anything else. So just if you're thinking, I really want to get the information that's in the edges here, just be a little bit more careful with that. But in general, I still think I like the vignette that it gives at f2.8. It's a very kind of natural vignette, and I think the blur that you've got is a beautiful blur. Like that is a soft bokeh that you've got in the background there, which isn't. It is sometimes you get a very distracting blur in the background with certain lenses, but here I would say that the background is just lovely, buttery soft mush compared to some other stuff. And in terms of the vignetting, so here it was f5 and here it was at f2.8, so it should be roughly the same exposure, but you can see at 2.8 it's a little bit darker. So again, the transmission amount of light that gets through the lens at f2.8 may not be exactly a 2.8's worth of brightness coming through, so that's something to be aware of when you're using this. But certainly, in terms of like look up at the corner again, full frame, so bear that in mind. Look at how much at f2.8 strong vignette, and then once down to f5. So at f5, I would say it's probably a fantastic lens. And if you are out in the street and you're shooting kind of bright sunny kind of stuff, you're going to be at f5.6, f8, f16 kind of region, and the lens works magnificently there. But
I'm showing you the examples of it in its most difficult situations.
Okay, so to finish off, I'll go through the 5 points which makes me think that this is a very good lens. 1, price. It's very cheap at £350 new, around about £200 second hand. 2, it's light and small, so that kind of goes into the same thing. Smaller than the other lenses and lighter, so that's fine if you're wanting to be walking around with this lens all day long. It's easier with this than it would be with its big fat brother, which is 910 grams. This one's only 500 grams, so it's almost 40% lighter. It's got a smaller filter thread, so that means if you're getting circular polarizers or if you're getting just filters for the front, that's going to save you a little bit more money there as well. Next bit, so I think that's maybe up to 3 or something there. Macro, it gets super close. It gets closer than its bigger brother, which is always quite good. And especially when you've got that 75mm and its macro capabilities, that is a good bit of closeness. So like if you're shooting little bugs or flowers in the park, that's pretty good. Not so good as the surrounding bits of the image, but that's not what we're talking about here. And last thing is, because this has, if you get the Nikon version, this is specific to the Nikon, because it has the aperture ring at the back here where you press in a little button here and you can change the ring. That means by just getting a very cheap lens adapter, you can put the Nikon lens onto any Canon camera. So this will go onto the Canon camera, the Canon 5D Mark II just now, or even the 550D. And what do, in fact, I'll show you. I'll stick this on you. So that's you at 28mm. I shall take this camera off here. And now you can see I've managed to put the Nikon 28 to 75mm onto a Canon camera, and that's the kind of view that we're getting from it. So it's wide enough to be shooting indoors. So if you're seeing the kind of distance from me to the camera just now, I'm just there, it's over there, and it's able to, maybe I haven't put it in focus, but there you go. And if we zoom all the way out to 35mm, I think the only thing that's in focus is Mr. Hippo. So that's the kind of zoom range that we're getting there. In fact, maybe I'll just take you off and I shall hold you and show you. So 24mm, I can get this that close on a full frame Canon 5D Mark II, but then I can zoom in and look at his eyes. Soulless eyes. No, those are the eyes of happiness. So, and there, if we focus, and it's actually quite smooth focusing. So potentially good on a tripod, on a Canon, for you to see the focusing. So there you go.